And so Cocktails with LA came around at a time when I had failed at a 16-year relationship.
Wow.
I was married and I have two children, and I had been married before. So, but it all came from somewhere and I wanted to understand it. So I wanted to understand the story that I was
Mm,
telling myself about myself.
right.
And that story continued over and over and over again, repeating the, oh, I was molested and then I was raped and then I started to have bad
Mm,
relationships and blah, 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 blah. And so I would take people on this journey and it would always just end,
right.
but with no resolution
Right.
because I wasn't looking at it that way. And when I applied the lens of a photographer to my life, I started to see colors in places that I didn't know were there. I was able to focus on aspects of my life that painted a totally different picture. And as I began to talk my story, I started to all of a sudden describe the things that I hadn't really been paying attention to before. And it
Mm,
started to change my narrative as I began to play with the picture.
mm.
And so that has been the greatest thing in asserting Cocktails with LA, the adventures of a recovering sex addict. I was able to give myself that title because the adventures is what this is all about. It's a rite of passage constantly, a constant death and rebirth that is happening from the perspective of where the great fall happened. It's been, death and then rebirth. Um, and so the adventures of the recovering sex addict is me, and I'm writing about it in a book called Thirsty as Fuck because
Love the title.
yeah, it's called Thirsty as Fuck from the Desert to the Well. And
Wow.
in COVID, I have been able to accelerate my healing in such a way that I met a pastor on one of my IG lives, and we had spoken offline for like about half an hour to 45 minutes. And then we went on live. And he professed on my live that that I was going to be an instrument for God, and
Wow.
that he called me the woman at the well. And
Mm,
so when people want to talk about my story and they want to know who I am, I've now decided to say, oh, my story is the woman at the well. I am the woman at the well. Oh, what's that? Oh, well, the woman at the well is who Jesus met, who was from Samaria, and he waited for her at the well as he rested. And he knew instinctively that this woman would arrive at the well because of the time of day. Nobody's going out in the heat at midday, but this is when the woman decided to come, probably because she knew no one else would be there. And that's why she was startled when she saw Jesus sitting there. Not only was someone there, but he was also the Jew. So, they're not supposed to be talking, so to speak. But
mm,
he tells her about her life. And he says to give him a drink, and she's surprised that he's even asking her for anything. Sometimes we're surprised that God would ask us for anything,
mhm.
right? And so she does, and then what he says essentially is, if you drink from this well, you'll never thirst again, is essentially what happened. And something happened when he told me that that's who I was. I recognized all the thirst traps that I had been falling in my whole life, bartering sex for love and connection, being a people pleaser so that I would have friends and fit into certain circles. And all of these thirst traps, I was looking externally for who I was, when
Mm,
really the well is within me. And I
mm.
have unlimited access to it all the time. And so if I understand that, then I'll never thirst again.
Wow. That's a lot there. I feel like we could just end on that, but that was
Let's go.
that was a sermon in itself. Well, goddamn, that's how you're gonna start. Well, there we go.
Sorry.
No, that's beautiful. I want to touch on something you said, and two things you said actually. So, the first thing was you mentioned about the story. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Landmark before. I don't know if
I
you've
have the landmark forum.
yeah, so I don't know if you did it, but I did it
The
years
beginning
ago.
one.
Yeah, the forum. So I did it like 2015, something like that. And
Okay.
I know that they refer to the story as a racket. That was the
Yeah,
term that they
I know
used
about
back
it.
then. And it's so interesting you brought that up. And throughout that 72 hour 3 day course, Yeah,
No
because
hardly any food.
you know, they didn't let you out. They didn't let you out.
You
That
gonna learn
was,
today.
yeah, that was the biggest lesson I learned. That was the biggest takeaway I got, was just recognizing that, you know, we all play this story in our head. And whether your story be a negative story, so in your situation, you know, whether it be something abusive, or I remember specifically in my class, there was a very beautiful young woman who just remarried, and her husband were doing the course together, and she was still holding on to the trauma from her previous marriage, where she was raped in her previous marriage,
Oh,
and
wow.
and it was now affecting the intimacy in her new marriage. And I
Mm,
remember the instructor being like, you know, everything you went through is traumatic, and you have the right to feel the way that you feel,
right.
but you have to ask yourself, is your story empowering you or disempowering you? And that right there, just that, the
Like,
way he phrased that is
turn
my,
the light on.
it's not that I never have negative stories, but it allows me to give me, to check myself. Like, okay, is this
Right.
story that I'm playing in my head right now, is this, you know, adding to me right now? Or is it taking away? And if it's taking away from me right now, what can I do to kind of adjust it, to change the story that I'm playing in my head? So I just really want to call that
But
out.